Hola, ¿cómo estás? Welcome to some Colombian black metal here on Rauta. This one is Gexerott, and it's a pretty unknown band, but this came to my review pile already at least more than 2 years ago and has been there ever since. Why? Because it was a little bit old already on arrival, and as such it has been waiting for its turn, and turns out even this one has been waiting for quite some time. The band hasn't really been putting out some new music. This one, however, is not your typical black metal release to begin with, although there are lots of familiar elements from the black metal genre, mostly second wave. But if we are a little bit strict with that and consider how the music with Gexerott is, you could really put this in the world of third wave black metal, and nobody would probably go and say disagree, like, hey, this sounds old school, because technically speaking, nothing here reeks of old school. This is a very neutral statement. As such, not gonna blame the band for doing something modern and all, but yeah, in case you're expecting something more traditional, be it in the 80s or 90s wave, you're gonna be disappointed with this one. So now that we have the CD showed to you, let's focus on the band's more information and talk more about this particular album while we have Metal Archives here as a backdrop. So, founded in Medellin, a lot of people know this city for Pablo Escobar, cocaine business back in the 80s and all that stuff. So a very, very infamous place. But let's be honest about it. Colombia, when it comes to extreme metal scene, has had a lot of bands to offer, and obviously different than your typical Nordic or European bands to begin with. But like I said, Colombia has already done a lot of black metal things, black thrash things, and all that stuff. And Gexerott is one of those names, and founded more than 20 years. Feels like eternity now. I mean, it's not like really this band is talked about all over again. For me, this was the first time I got to hear this, but as you can see, this is the third album but so far, called Hallucinetic Violet Ignition, which explains their rather violent cover. Violent. No, seriously speaking, violet cover, and that's the story so far. 3 albums, 2007, 2013, and now 2021. Been a while since the band released new music, and we don't know what's the story at the moment. Their band picture is somewhat unusual. I mean, this is kind of extraordinary in ways. Yeah, sure, you have skulls and corpse beds, but also, like, what is this place the guys are set up? I don't know, it's fascinating in a way, but also a little bit peculiar, a little bit odd, and so is the music when we're talking about the third one. Now, what you also might have noticed already while I'm babbling here is that genre was labeled as black metal early and black doom metal later. This is partially very accurate, partially true with this album, but I wouldn't say it accurately describes what's going on with this 37 minutes and then some. So, what is this Hallucinetic Violet Ignition all about then? Well, certain parts of this album are kind of a traditional black metal, maybe with the modern touch, and for a while you might be figuring out what the hell is this guy talking about? This sounds like proper black metal, until it doesn't. And that's where your mind is like, okay, now I get what this guy is talking to. Some people might say it's a little bit doomy, sure, but I will challenge that and say it's more, say, progressive kind of a black metal, borderlining bands that are outright avant-garde-ish with their take on black metal. Now, I was figuring out what bands come to my mind when I was listening to this one, especially when you have those clean vocals and, say, the non-typical parts in terms of black metal come into play, because there are those which you really like separate this from your typical black metal, and even a lot of those modern bands. And for various reasons, Arcturus came to my mind. Now, I'm not going to say this sounds like an Arcturus copycat or coming straight from the same pool or whatever box you want to call it, but I would say these two different bands from two different parts of the world really share some kind of a DNA. Well, sort, mentally anyway. So there are parts where this sounds like your typical, more, say, modern black metal, but black metal nonetheless. And sometimes it just goes out of the border and sounds like, okay, these guys are probably abandoning black metal on the long run. It's almost like this could be seen as a transition phase of an album. And I know I've been using that word for a lot of different releases throughout the years for various bands, when there is this like, okay, we'll start playing with death metal, and then we have this album which is only partially death metal, and whatever you have afterwards is different. It's hard to say this, obviously, for bands that are yet to release more music versus the bands that you get to see as in hindsight and see the whole big picture, whole discography and all. But this is what it sounds to me. It's almost like this band wants to cling on to black metal, past, present, or whatever, and at the same time move on. Incorporate elements that are not necessarily black metal at all. So calling it black metal doom, yeah, in a way, sure, but it's a stretch. Calling it just progressive black metal, or even to a certain degree post black metal, then again, is a whole different game. And I wouldn't, challenge people saying, okay, it's more about post black rather than progressive. Point here is, this is definitely moving on with the whole idea. And it's not just about the clean vocals, it's the overall picture. What is good here, however, is that the production very much suits both kind of things, rather the more traditional black metal sides of things and the not so obvious black metal parts. And this is very important because when you are doing sort of a kind of a hybrid album, you really need to have a production or say catering of sounds that really supports different styles. And as such, this is kind of a fascinating, but I think the band has a little bit dropped the ball here. I'm saying this is not the most easy to digest, so maybe there is a reason why bands like this is not that famous. It's not just about being Colombian bands, because there are bands that are touring or are doing gigs and are more straightforward and easier to approach. Gexerott with this album, I'm gonna predict and say it's gonna divide people into two. And the marginal one is the smaller one, obviously. The ones that, hey, yeah, we like because you're something unusual, something different, something that is more challenging to listen to. Maybe you need dozens and dozens of times really to just do the magic. But a lot of people will say, okay, this is not what I signed up for. I wanted a black metal album, and since this is not exactly that, I'm not gonna do. It's almost like this is the vegan alternative. You wanted a steak or you wanted some sausage and you got this different. People will say, yeah, it sounds almost like the same, but it's not. So there is that. And this is by no means meant as an offense. I'm just pointing out that when you're getting ready to listen to this album, you just kind of have to embrace the very fact that it's not necessarily what you're looking for. But that doesn't mean this album isn't, full of interesting ideas or the band doesn't have an interesting approach. Rather, they do have it. But like I said, the very problem with so many transition phase albums is that once you're not already in the next ship, you're going to have one foot in another and one foot in another one. Meaning you are going to divide people into two, and it might become a future classic, but it's kind of unlikely. Anyway, if you are into bands like, say, Arcturus and whatnot, especially the era when they were like moving out basically from the black metal department, this might be your cup of tea. But obviously, it depends on your personal taste buds and preferences. Now, links are included in the description box so you can start listening and digging more information like about their social media and all. But in case I got you interested, please do check it out. It's the only way to really check out whether or not you're gonna like the band or not. Now, off you go, enjoy.